we're very excited today to be talking about the civic work of arts organisations during COVID-19. And to do that, we're going to start off with talks from Anna Herman and Alan Lane. I'll then sort of ask a few questions that have been raised by their talks. We'll have a short comfort break, and then we'll have responses from our wonderful respondents, Kara McKechnie and Javier Shaw. So just to quickly introduce Anna and Alan, Anna Herman is the Joint Artistic Director of theatre company Clean Break and was elected as co-chair of the National Criminal Justice Arts Alliance in July 2020. Anna has been working in the field of theatre and social change for 30 years, specialising in theatre and education with marginalised groups in the UK and abroad. And Alan Lane is Artistic Director of Slung, a theatre company specialising in outdoor people's theatre. Based in the oldest working men's club in Britain, they run a cultural community college and manage 16 acres of Yorkshire woodland. So I'm going to hand over first to Anna to share her thoughts with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Ali, and thank you to everyone for being here. So yes, I'm really delighted to be here and to share some of the work that Clean Break has been doing during this period, the challenging time that we've all been facing collectively. So as Sarah said, I'm speaking as the Joint Artistic Director of Clean Break. And for those of you who don't know us, we're a women-only theatre company, and we specialise in making theatre with and telling the stories of women with lived experience of the criminal justice system and women who identify as at risk of offending. We work in women's prisons, women's centres, and at our own studios in North London, and we produce theatre which we tour nationally. But I'm also speaking this evening as a theatre maker, and during my 30-year career in theatre, I have only ever made work which has a social purpose, working with communities and in communal spaces, which are profoundly about social change and addressing inequalities and injustices in society. So for me, in many ways, the civic role of the arts has always been an integral and non-negotiable component of the art that I'm interested in making. However, the term civic role has not been at the forefront of the language that I use to describe that practice. I'm more familiar with the terms socially engaged, participatory, applied theatre, community theatre, but I believe that civic speaks loosely to the same cause, the role of the arts to engage and enable people for a social purpose. And engaging and enabling women is at the heart of the work of Clean Break. Supporting women to make changes in their lives and to create theatre, working with brilliant female artists in the knowledge that creativity and being heard serves to both impact positively on women's own lives and to deepen understanding of audiences through the stories we tell. So we strive to hold in our mission both the quality of the theatre we create and the civic responsibility of the company to support women in their quest to alter their lives. These two elements coexist, but not always easily. At times, we've been deeply tested as to whether it is possible to serve both of these functions in harmony, often because of scarce resources. What and who do we prioritise when money is tight? Our members bring many needs alongside their desire to create. They face poverty, housing insecurity, childhood trauma, drug and alcohol use, and mental health distress, amongst a myriad of other things. So if housing is a need, do we offer housing advice? Do we offer housing? When waiting lists for therapy and counselling are 6 to 12 months long in the community, and we know how essential it is for someone, do we provide the therapy ourselves? These questions have marked our conversations over many decades. Our response has often been to work in partnership with those delivering these services. For example, we currently are in partnership with Holloway United Therapies, which has meant that we can offer therapy to our members without taking on the role of delivering it ourselves. And this has allowed us to retain the balance between what we specialise in and what others do alongside us. But this has become more challenging as austerity has taken a hold and services have closed. So for me, the parameters of our civic role continues to be an area of challenge year on year. However, in March 2020, in the moment of COVID, it was absolutely transparent what our priority was and should be. It was the urgent need of our members, and this need underpinned all our conversations internally and many of the decisions that we made. This clarity of purpose served us well in the chaos of this new world as we tried to follow government guidance, needed to furlough some of our team, and needed to draft numerous scenarios, A, scenario B, scenario C, scenario D, and then throw them all away and create a new one to look at how we were going to survive the next period. So with our building closed and our primary concern and clear focus on our membership, we set about creating an alternative programme for the women who came to our building on a weekly basis. So within 4 weeks of lockdown, we'd designed and launched an online programme of creative videos led by female practitioners, offering a range of health and wellbeing, theatre and playwriting activities each week, which women could do on their own, in their own time. In parallel with this, we bought laptops and data for members who had no access to the internet. And with the realization that actually the digital world suddenly increased the potential of others to access our programme, we shared the videos with our Women's Centre partners nationally so that those in Newcastle, Brighton and Cornwall could also engage. Our therapy provision moved online and over the phone, and we delivered regular one-to-one support over the phone. Our small support team became stretched beyond recognition during this period, as the intensity of stories of the women that they worked with, sharing stories of no food in their cupboards, many addiction-related relapses, as was shared very publicly, the hugely increased incidents of domestic violence and mental health crises, which surged during this period. So we were fortunate to be able to access a lot of emergency funding with our development team working hard to make this possible, and we grew the team temporarily. And we also established a volunteer scheme, which we call Creative Buddies, which utilised our amazing network of volunteers to connect weekly with some of our members to write together, create, talk and reduce isolation. The artists who make up our wider community saw the urgency of the need we were meeting, and they offered their time and support, enabling us also to set up a programme of mentoring for our young artists across the months of lockdown. So our members were very clearly our first priority, but women serving prison sentences, who also remain at the heart of the company's mission, were a huge concern during lockdown, with frequent reports of no visits being allowed and concerns about the impact of well-being on what being locked up for 23 hours a day and separated from your family would do to someone's state of mental health. So having had to have cancelled 2 projects, which we were poised to deliver in women's prisons at that time, we knew we had to include women in prison in our response plans. So in partnership with the charity It's Not Your Birthday But, in a 2-week period in May 2020, we called out across our social media channels and in response received over 200 messages and some beautiful artwork from women in the community with messages of hope and inspiration, which we delivered to women in HMP Downview, which is one of the prisons in Surrey, in southeast London, southeast England, who wrote their own messages, and the women in prison wrote their own messages in response, which we then distributed to our members in the community. We couldn't meet any of the practical needs of women in prison in this moment, but we could offer connection and care across the prison walls. So when COVID struck, our strong social mission simplified the decisions we made. But the impact of COVID, as we all know, was not only felt by those most vulnerable. And our responsibility as employers became a significant feature of our weekly leadership team meetings. The vulnerability of freelancers as well, who make up 70% of the theatre workforce, which was being increasingly recognised as a huge structural inequality of the industry in this moment. Many artists were losing their livelihood, particularly those with no financial safety net. Everyone felt vulnerable to the impact of COVID on their mental health. And it became clear to us that our civic responsibility also lay with our staff and our freelancers to go above and beyond as a compassionate employer to better consider the well-being of everyone in our community, to distribute funds to artists through creating work, and to offer connection where we could. So 2 meters apart was our response to this need. The project paired together 12 playwrights with 12 artists from our members pool to connect digitally over 3 months, to share ideas and to collaborate, however they wanted to interpret that. Importantly, this was the only remit. There was no expectation to submit work. It was welcome, but not required. And it became clear to us through the project how important this offer of a creative, collaborative space was, without deadlines, at a time of deep isolation, uncertainty, and global anxiety. By July, it became clear to us that if there was any way we could, we needed to reopen the building by September. It was voiced consistently by our members. When can we come back? When can we be back in the space together? We need to connect. The importance of the physical space and its essential role in what makes us who we are became really, really apparent through this period. And our team worked exceptionally hard to make us COVID safe and enabled us to be proud to reopen our doors in September and to offer what is now our current practice, which is a blended programme of face-to-face activity for those who want to come in and an online programme for those who do not or who aren't able to. So that's just a kind of brief overview of some of the response projects that we established as part of our civic responsibility during COVID. And I think for those of us running organisations, this responsibility has really, really heightened in this time, and at times the weight of it feels very heavy. At Clean Break, our members have remained our focus, and we've been generously supported by funders to enable us to really respond effectively. But our staff team, our community of artists, our volunteers, there is a lot of expression of need across this period, and everyone needs to be cared for and led with compassion and kindness. The pandemic has shone a light on all of our fragility and has sadly exacerbated many inequalities, with women often carrying an unequal amount of the burden. The civic role of all arts is essential as we move forward. And I look forward to seeing and experiencing more of this across all our institutions, both large and small. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing what a sort of breadth of work Clean Break have been involved in since, well, longer, but since particularly thinking about since March. That was really brilliant. Thank you, Anna. I'm just going to go straight to Alan now, and then we'll sort of reconvene after Alan has spoken. So Alan, are you ready to join us?
I am. Thank you so much for having me. It's really nice to be here. My name's Alan, and I'm part of a team that runs Slung, which is an outdoor people's theatre company. And we're based in the oldest working men's club in Britain. And we try to be value-driven, value-led, even when it gets us into trouble. And there isn't quite time to go into all of them today, but God, they're gone forever. It's like, yeah. But the one that I suppose I want to talk about now is the belief that this country spends £500 million of public money on the arts, and it is my belief that that means everyone who lives in England should and must have the best cultural life possible, and that isn't true. We know that isn't true, and specifically because we are but a small team. Specifically, we're interested in Holbeck, which is in South Leeds, inner city South Leeds, and we are committed to making sure that the people of Holbeck, our community, have the best cultural life possible. And in order to do that, we have two kind of pillars either side, one of which is be useful, be kind, and the other one is we say yes to everything. Everybody gets what they want, but nobody gets to stop other people getting what they want. And whilst they sound like something a 4-year-old might be able to understand that actually if you just refuse to compromise on those two things, you find yourselves in all sorts of trouble. And we find ourselves in all sorts of trouble. So COVID hit, and we had a meeting, discussed it around the pool table, and we decided that our response in the initial was to write a letter to the 200 nearest houses to us, saying we're still here, the pub's shut, we shut early because our members here are old and they all have pre-existing conditions. But we sent a letter to 200 people saying we're here, we've got a van, we feel reasonably safe, we can protect ourselves, we're here, if you need to just let us know. And people started to ask us to do all sorts of things, walking dogs, doing shopping, picking up prescriptions, needing food. And then the council rang and said, we hear you're doing this for 200 people. Could you do it for the whole ward? And I, not understanding what a ward means, said yes, which is 7,500 houses in Holbeck and Beeston. And so for a while, if you rang Leeds City Council and said, I've got a problem because of COVID and I need some help, that information was sent straight through to us. So there is a big argument at the minute about what that actually means and like what the name means and what we're called. But fundamentally, that's what we did for 4 months. So we walked dogs, fetched shopping, picked up prescriptions, rang so many people and chatted to them. We have the most amazing team of volunteers organised by this amazing organisation called Voluntary Action Leeds, and we just got on with the business of doing that. I spayed someone's cat. I mean, I took it to the vets, I didn't do it personally. So that's the sort of thing we did, whatever was necessary. And what became clear, thank you for laughing because I didn't know how that joke would go down. What we did was it became clear that people just needed food. It was a really long process, but people just needed food, lots of it. Not because of COVID, sometimes because of COVID, but mostly because if you're a 0-hour contract cleaner, looking after your 3 kids in Holbeck, desperately trying to get on, at some point this year has screwed you and you need some food. So we became a non-means tested self-referral food bank, which again, these are all words I didn't even know existed, Jenny. I'm a theatre director, but that means if you come to us or you ring us or you email us or you get your friend to drop round and ask for food, we will give it to you no matter what. That's the deal. So we have done roughly 6,500 to date. Boxes, they're huge. They're in the background in an ostentatious way. Best Wi-Fi signal as well. 6,500 of them go out to people. We do about 200 a day, and they're full of good stuff. We haven't got time what they're full of, but they're basically full of what I think it takes to feed a family of people for 5 days. Alongside that, we also kept responding as best we could to as artists. We ran an art gallery, so we put a letter through every house in the area saying, draw a picture, we'll print it on a waterproof board and we'll put it up on the lamppost. We had hundreds of people doing that. So for 4 months, the whole area was an art gallery drawn by the people. We made up this ridiculous game show that we live streamed to all the members, which was just because it was just me, my wife and my baby, because no one else was allowed in. At one point, we threw the child over an ironing board. That was the game, to see if he would fly over. He did. It was very funny. And we I suppose the point is that we responded to stuff. I don't want to do that. I didn't have any interest. I make big fiery theatre. I didn't have any interest in putting people's pictures on an art gallery. And I certainly didn't really have any interest in doing a game show. The response was a civic response. And there was a moment particularly which was really interesting for us, which was we delivered hot meals, 64 hot meals to 64 children every single day, 5 days a week. No, 7 days a week for a while. So we saw these kids every single day for about 3 months. And what we saw, I'm a theatre director, that's all I know. But what I saw was this unbelievable hurtling towards a type of chaos. The food wasn't great. It was chips and pies and chips and sausage and chips and something. We're going to have a heart disease problem in 20 years. But we were feeding the kids best we could. But the whole place was just getting wild. There was more and more stuff. The parents were more and more stressed, more stuff in the street. The kids were running around. We're like, we've got to do something. We've got to give them something to look forward to. So we put on a show. We have a brilliant theatre company here, children's theatre company called Romsumble, and like Anna said, it was a good time to start finding ways in which your community of freelancers could work. So we put this show on. It was on the back of a lorry. We use a headphone technology so the audience could be far away, and we put them all in tents in these pods. And the only problem with the show was that the culture secretary declared 2 hours before the show or something that theatre would be allowed in 3 weeks' time. And here we were putting on this piece of theatre very demonstrably and very clearly, without any like hiding, but it was that moment where before there was a little bit of a wiggle room, which we could say, well, we're doing this and obviously we're keeping everyone safe. That wasn't the risk, but it was what risk are we putting ourselves and the organisation at? And this moment when it is very clear that the national government have just said that theatre isn't allowed. And it was so clear to us. It was so clear to us that the kids were safe. The kids had been made safe. There was no COVID risk. The amount of protection was huge. The risk was to us. And so we were very clear. We contacted everyone we could get hold of, the police, the city council. We said, we're not hiding, but we are going to do this. And so, and this is why, crucially, this is why. And the kids came, they had an amazing time. And no, it didn't solve everything. And it was a real moment where in our risk assessment and what we do as an organization, we were like, why are we doing this? Because looking at it from one point of view, this is a real risk. This is madness. This show, everything we do at the club is pay what you decide. So there is no income. So it's not like we needed to keep going. Artists had already been paid. But actually you go, this is a civic act. This is a civic act towards our neighbours. This is how we are in service to the people of Holbeck. And we are to do whatever is necessary, yes, to give them the best cultural life, but also to, what is the point of putting on an amazing cabaret in the car park just over my shoulder when the people who can see the car park from their homes are too faint with hunger to turn up? At that point, it doesn't matter if the tickets are free or I've knocked on every door like we do and said, hey guys, come to a cabaret. It seems like an act of cruelty. And so on the one hand, I've been thinking about civic acts of theatre companies and arts organisations and everything else. And the thing that's really struck me is how much that we did before that was accidentally cruel. And it's taken this COVID, and more importantly, it's taken the freedom. One of the things we now say is there is no one to give you permission. There is no one to give you permission to open a non-means self-referral food bank. I promise you, it annoys so many people. I cannot tell you how angry various people in the council are, to the point where we don't get food delivered anymore because the non-means tested bit of it is problematic. There is no one to give you permission, but to do anything else would be the act of, it's cruel. And so we started this thinking that it was civic. We're like, we're civic people. We're doing this for the greater good of the community. And I'm not convinced that we are now. We're in service to the community. We hope, because we have values. I told you about them, there are some more. But also, I think, if I'm honest, we're in service to our community because to do anything else would be too shameful. There was an opportunity, it was really clear to us. We're beyond the market here. We get well funded comparatively. We're on a company wage. I could have gone home and furloughed myself for however long. I got a really nice wood. I could have managed that. And we saw that future. We're artists, we imagine futures, and we saw it really clearly. And I didn't not take that. We didn't not take that because we were like, well, no, we're better people than that. It's nothing to do with that. We didn't take that because we would have to come back here and look everybody in the eye, and they would know that we did that. And I honestly couldn't, because I couldn't do it, because I couldn't do it. And also because it would be the end of everything. Like, we've poured 10 years into this community, and to blow it on that. And I suppose that's where we are. I started thinking, wow, we're doing that work that is civic. And now I think I'm just scrabbling to keep my sense of, to keep the shame off me. And whilst I don't judge anyone anything, I think as a sector, we've not always responded as creatively as we could have done. We have not always been as imaginative as we have. And I think that people will remember that. And I think that there's going to be a few years where we're going to have to earn, collectively, we're going to have to earn their trust back. And that's my time. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that, Alan, and really sharing some sort of provocations for us to sort of work through and think through together. I'm just going to, while we let that sink in, and yes, can we have rounds of applause for our speakers? Both, you may choose emoji, you may choose visual, you may choose audio. Rounds of applause anyway. There's many clapping hands popping up there. I'm just going to pass over to Ali briefly while we're thinking.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm sure everyone's got a lot of things to contemplate, and I wonder if we might use the moment in a similar way that we might if we had our friend or partner or person that we've just met in the breakout room next to us to say something that struck you while you've been listening. And my provocation is to in the chat right now. Could you complete the phrase, the civic role of the arts, having listened to Anna and Alan, is, or the civic role of the arts is not? And any thoughts that come to mind, would be great to have a couple of things just popping up in the chat. We won't spend too long on it, just if there's something that strikes you. And I know then after that, Sarah will be pushing a little bit further at these provocations offered by Alan and Anna. Thanks.
We'll now get started again after the break, and we'll be hearing from two respondents who've sort of developed responses to those talks and who are joining us from different institutions tonight. So I'll introduce them both, and then we'll hear from Cara first, and then Javier. So first we have Dr. Cara McKechnie, an Anglo-German academic based at the University of Leeds, with a research focus in dramaturgy and opera studies. Cara is part German and part British. She is part academic and part dramaturg. She is part theatre and part opera. She is part practice, part teach and research liveness, mediatization and adaptation studies. Cara's work with Leeds-based Slung is very important to her. She dramaturged their 4-part epic Flood as part of the Hull City of Culture and is now resident dramaturg at the company. And following Cara, we'll have Dr. Javier Shaw, an academic and educationalist driven by the pursuit of social justice. She manages and teaches on a range of areas at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama, University of London, where she is also equity and inclusion specialist. Javier's work is interdisciplinary and aligns with the visual arts, sociology, policy and education fields. And in 2018, she set up the Social Performance Network, which is a research and practice orientated platform that aims to extend focus on issues surrounding socialization and its performance and enactments in social world contexts. So we're very grateful that they're joining us here this evening, and I will just pass over now to Cara.
Thank you, Sarah, former office mate, very much missed. I'm very happy to be in this company, and I'm delighted by what I've heard so far and what I've seen in the chat. So it feels hopeful, which is not the feeling I expected when I started the day today. The other thought, slightly random thought and not prepared at all, was that there's always a German word for everything. And the two German words that popped up in my befuddled brain just now were Civic Courage, that's a very important one, Civic Courage, which is for some reason more common in use in Germany than here, although probably not in evidence, it's probably in the same level of evidence. And the other one is civiler Ungehorsam, civic disobedience, and the kind of creative paths that both Anna and Alan and my Slung friends and colleagues have taken with those two terms are inspiring, to say the least, and I'll come back to them later. I started by trying to be methodical, and I was really struck, quite emotionally struck, by reading a report by the Gulbenkian Foundation, who happened to be my funders, who enabled me to work for Slung for a day a week for 2 years. And in their report into the civic role of arts organizations, on the first page, it says, we have not found any arguments against arts organizations acknowledging or developing their civic role. And that's kind of complemented by a very straightforward definition, the way in which arts organizations animate, enhance and enable processes by which people exercise their rights and responsibilities as members of the community. So not as members of the theatre company, not as audiences, but as members of the community. Okay, and I think that's a very viable thing to kind of run with for now. Finally, also, it's in the Declaration of Human Rights. A right to participate in the cultural life of the community is part of our human rights. And theatre companies, according to that declaration, have the duty to be an active part of their community. So it's not a bonus. It's not something that's really in any way negotiable. It's kind of expected, and so it should be. So just a little sort of detour, really. Sarah's introduced me as somebody who deals in adaptation, and adaptation on a very simple level means a change to suit the environment. Now, changing to suit the environment is what everybody I know did earlier on this year. And there is absolutely no reason that I can think of that, wouldn't mean that arts and arts organisations shouldn't be obliged to do the same. And this is not new, obviously. So theatres became shelters for bombed out families in World War II. Artists didn't kind of go home and resign. They went on tour, they took to the road. And in doing so, these wartime tours to churches and community spaces provided some of the seeds for the Arts Council movement, and alongside the construction of the welfare state, and very much in a kind of democracy of culture sense. Cultural democracy is, the more desirable condition now. What we're talking then is a democracy of culture, where the decisions about that culture are made by other people. When an earthquake struck the Turkish city of Izmit in 1999, that theatre of that town became a shelter, a soup kitchen, a community hub, which it wasn't before that, from which healing arts initiatives were then created in response to the needs post-earthquake, after that emergency. When Germany, my home country, sort of, my other country, opened its borders to refugees from war zones in 2015, accepted 1 million refugees into the country, theatre spaces and theatre ensembles played a very crucial part in providing welcome, temporary shelter, food and basic provisions before families moved into dorms. Some of those initiatives are still running 5 years later now. And as a heavily subsidised sector, it hasn't done them any harm. It hasn't had them attacked by politicians who think that they are partisan or anything. So theatres like the Maxim Gorky Theatre in Berlin have, off the back of those initiatives, had an opportunity to create intercultural dialogue, which was generally lagging behind quite a bit, or was very tokenistic in Germany before that time. Theatres have also become hubs for keeping the far-right Alternative for Germany, the AfD, at bay. And what they need to do, and what they frequently manage to do quite publicly, is take up a position, take up a stance, show as Haltung zeigen is the German term. So they kind of show an ideological position, and there's kind of a tradition to fall back on in our country as well, but it's kind of clearer in Germany because subsidy goes further back. Theatre and the state's relationship is more firmly established. So Schiller talks about theatre as a moral institution, Theater als moralische Anstalt, and that stands in such a stark contrast to theatre is the West End that it kind of gives me a headache just thinking about it. So things by, snippets by Brecht come to mind. Food is the first thing, morals follow on, just sort of roughly translated. So just coming back to the UK, I think the entrenched values for kind of devaluing care and throwing into question the civic role of arts organisations that was happening, that's been destabilised an awful lot. And again, that's part of the thing that maybe makes me hopeful. And the kind of, how can you justify not doing what everybody's doing, not joining the surge of volunteering, not thinking about food banks, not experiencing them from the inside, which has, a very noticeable effect on the way that we think about art really as well. So Civic Courage, taking up a stance, showing position, and using civil disobedience in a very direct and political sense is something that's been happening. And I've been talking too long already. There's also the need to tell stories of who we were, who we are, and who we want to be. And that's, another obligation of any arts organization. So where are the lessons, and where is that kind of inside scrutiny, that lived experience of solidarity, not charity? That's kind of been my buzzword for the last few months. Where does that lead us? Does it lead us towards a national arts service, as has been suggested? Does that mean that each arts organisation should have a portfolio of responsibility, like Clean Break and Slung are already demonstrating? What's the balance between the local and the global? And I'm not pretending that I can answer any of those questions, really. So I'll kind of stop my monologue and talk to Sarah if there's time.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Cara.
Thank you. Bit of a diatribe.
No, happy to welcome diatribes, especially when they take us around the world. So thank you very much for that, Cara. I'm going to now pass over to Javier Shaw, who's going to offer our other kind of provocation in response to what we've been thinking through this evening.
Sure. So I'm going to sort of expand it into the arts section. So whilst theatre is an incredibly important medium, I was very much drawn to the emphasis on how all the different artistic mediums can perhaps create a civic role. I was really drawn to both of what Anna and Alan were saying around the you've got that sense of civic responsibility, but then you've also got that artistic expression. Then you've also got that, you know, challenge of facilitation, and then I guess prioritizing based on what the social narrative is of the time. It's something I can most certainly relate to in the context of the work that I've been doing through the Social Performance Network, which doesn't have a public space. It doesn't have a physical space, sorry, so it's very virtual, but attempts to provide platforms. And I think one of the challenges that I feel that we face it's a major challenge. It's that disjuncture between the funded streams and the civic arts that come through those streams, and a lot of responsibility that's often attached to those means of funding, and then the non-funded civic arts. And I think I'm probably an example of being completely non-funded. So literally, I could relate to a lot of what Alan was saying about running out of money and trying to find it somewhere. That is literally my own personal narrative. I think I was looking at the chat when Ali, you asked that really important question, and I actually had to take notes because some of the responses were, well, all of the responses were great, but there was some of the stuff that really kind of struck me, and then I'm just going to sort of triangulate that with some broader considerations. So civic response could show solidarity to be adaptable to the needs of their community. That came from you, Cara, so which I felt was really apt. Keep on telling us truths so we can see things to change them. Resist overpowering structures of bureaucracy and use imagination as a weapon. And these elements in the chat really sort of struck me because I feel that essentially encapsulates, in my view, what we're really trying to do with this work. I think quite often this work is drawing attention to the experience of the oppressed, and how that oppression is often socialized into different sort of tropes in society. So you've got, you know, you can have a class orientated, race orientated, and there'll be all kinds of holder data attached to that or what have you. And it takes that lived experience, it takes that humanness out of it. There's an anonymous quote which says, statistics are the tears wiped off humans. And I feel civic arts really brings attention to this because it humanizes the experiences of oppression, and it also enables those platforms and those voices to be amplified, which I think is really important. The challenge, I guess, is in how we can continue that work in a way that is does right by the communities that we're working with, but also having those resources to be able to make that happen. And I think that is there's an uncomfortable tension there, which I think partially represents the very hierarchical systems that we're often implicitly challenging through this work. And that's it really I don't know if I've done that right, but
You've definitely done that right. Like, yes, like parts of my brain are just super excited. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I think actually listening to you speak just like made me realize that lots of this work that we're talking about, lots of this civic work, we're actually talking about people who are being excluded from like what might be understood as the civic arena. Actually, lots of the work that we've heard about tonight is about people who aren't otherwise included in that. And yeah, thanks for that light bulb moment. What we're going to do now is open it up to questions, and I think Ali, you're going to kind of lead on that. So questions sort of across our speakers.
Yes, I think it's a very good opportunity to kind of sit with what's being discussed by Cara and Javier for a moment as well, and think about using the chat again to share your sensibilities and kind of responses. How have you found what they've said? Was there something that was mentioned that has set the light bulbs going, like Sarah's got? Just before we open to other people's questions, what I might just do real quick is ask Cara if you have a response to Javier, and then, because Javier picked up on your point in the chat, I just wanted to kind of keep that as a conversation as well between the two of you.
Sorry, do I need to check the chat? Did I understand that properly?
No, just that Javier had raised that point of yours that you made in the chat about solidarity. But just wondering if you had a response to what she was saying now just after your talk.
Yeah, I got a bit distracted actually by in a good way by that point, thinking about how that solidarity can be demonstrated to people who feel that, who kind of perform their own exclusion in a way. That's partly the acute difficulty they're in, the fact that they're unable to find the space to engage. Like Alan was saying, the accidental cruelty of not thinking about the fact that there are needs that come before art, like, food is the first thing. But there's also, for me, there's a crisis of education that is tied up with the sensitivities of this government, of austerity, very heavily with austerity, that has led to narratives of othering, of who's allowed to speak on whose behalf, and judgment as well. Awful levels of judgment, not just kind of top down, but across as well. And Alan touched on the way that we experience that judgment at times in Holbeck, which can be a very beleaguered space, which can be an incredibly joyful space as well. So it's complicated. The tentacles of both the crisis of education and the crisis of austerity in more direct ways are fiendishly hard even to articulate, I think. And the effects will be with us for a very long time. I feel quite ashamed in terms of being part of an educational institution that is wrapped up in a bureaucratic system that propagates this kind of othering, without wanting to sound too militant about it. I can see the effects every day on people to whom we deliver food on a Thursday, when I just kind of finished being a pedagogue on a Wednesday. And like Alan says, it makes me ashamed to just think about theatre and to do artistic director things. It makes me ashamed to kind of think about education in that very detached way that in that very value driven way that we sometimes have to. And that's affected how I see our sector. And that's affected how I see the role of the arts as well, I guess. So, yeah.
I think what really struck me about your comment, Cara, was just this concept of solidarity and adaptability. And
yes.
I just really like that sort of dynamic, that synergy between the two, because I think it's responsive rather than reactive. Yeah. And it just reminded me a little bit around, so I'm just thinking just from an arts perspective. So with Black Lives Matter, one of the things that really came to the forefront was this, obviously, this globalized kind of awakening that was occurring, but then we were also seeing it on a micro level, whether it was institutionally, whether it was, in our areas, whether it was in our conversations. And I guess what made it even more unique as an experience was that many of us were in lockdown at the time, and we're quarantined, etc. So we're having these conversations and we're having this engagement and this conscious awareness that this awakening is occurring, but it's occurring without us congregating anywhere or having face-to-face contact or having, you know. So what that really drew attention to, for me personally, just from the social performance perspective, was the lack of platforms that there were to get the counter voices, the counter narratives, the counter art out there. And one of the most interesting things to just emerge was it just proved, to me, I guess it proved that there is almost I guess an uncomfortable relationship with whoever provides the funding or the money, you know, because you have this criteria to match. And going back to your point about whose voice, I absolutely agree. But then sometimes, going back to Alan's point, we can sometimes become guilty of deciding whose voice as well. So it's about how we give up those platforms, and how openly we're sharing those platforms. And I guess that's part of that adaptability. So the conversation can actually move on rather than just becoming repetitious, because I don't know how everybody else feels, but I feel that we seem to be having the same conversations as a nation on loop around poverty, particularly.
Yeah, I mean, just to very briefly, I don't want to talk for much longer, but looking back on the first few months, but the months between March and sort of August in particular, there were some real light bulb moments about having the space to kind of consider who has a platform and who hasn't. That's around Black Lives Matter, obviously. That's around the community I'm surrounded by. That's about freelancers. And yeah, it's kind of looking back now, when it was very tumultuous at the time. There's an increasing clarity about just the need to make space, basically, and the need to take up a stance and take responsibility. And the other flashbulb moment was Rebecca Solnit's concept of solidarity, not charity, you know, and that again, that applies to all those understandings. So I think as a citizen, I've made great strides, if not as an academic.
Cara, I'm gonna jump in there real quick, because I'm glad you mentioned that that was a Rebecca Solnit quote, because I would have quoted you.
It was, yeah.
Good thing.
Okay.
Just to get our citations correct. And I'm thinking, folks, it would be great to open up the questions. And I'm just wondering, you know, because what we've just had is a kind of impressionistic gathering of key concepts, almost, in a way that was very beautifully done by Cara and Javier, thinking about what's come up this evening already. I'm wondering if people would feel free to put in the chat which concept they're latching onto, or where they think, where their brains are at right now, where are you kind of sitting at the moment. And we might just get, you know, 2-word phrases or 1 word that come up in the chat. It might be that your head is stuck on poverty. It might be that you're resounding with solidarity, adaptability, citizenship for all its weirdness, or community even. Gosh, we really covered a whole lot of ground this evening. Thank you very much to all of our speakers and everyone for your amazing contributions. We will collect some more of the thoughts you've just shared with your colleagues and newfound seatmates in the breakout rooms. If you want to do add your comments in the chat, and you'll see that I've just added a link to a feedback form. And just before we end off with our final thanks and hear a little bit more from Sarah about what's coming up, I'm going to ask Tom to just share a little bit, maybe 1 or 2 images from what you've been doing this evening. Tom.
Yes, hello, can you hear me? Yes, good. I'm just going to share some pictures. Some of you might know me. I get around and I draw pictures of stuff. This is what we've been discussing. I wanted to just do some nice portraits of the speakers, because it's nice to have a picture of them. Now, these aren't terribly exciting. But there we are. That's who we all heard from. I apologise, Alan. And that's it. But then the more important stuff is not coloured in yet. But I just wanted to sort of share where I was headed with this stuff, and I love that idea. So I don't love it, it's awful, but it's just that I never really thought of it in that sense before. So I'm just going to share a few more things, and then you'll be getting like full color, brilliant, lovely versions of these and about 25 more as we go along through the week, maybe by Friday. So I'm just going to scroll through them. I just wanted to draw an octopus. That was great fun. So thank you for telling me about tentacles. Solidarity, not charity. I like that. I'm going to leave it there.
Thank you so much, Tom.
But it's just a real snapshot, really. Let me just stop sharing. There we are.
Thank you very much, Tom.
And so much to do. So.
Yes, let's keep the spirit of the cartoons and have our emojis present here in terms of our reactions. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to pass back to Sarah just to let us know where this is sitting and what's happening next. But also, please do leave further comments in the chat and so on. Yes.
Thanks, Ali. Yeah, just to let folks know, kind of while you're here, as part of this AHRC research project, we're running a series of events across a number of different institutions. I think maybe it's 11 institutions now, and we've had one event at York St John's, and Ali has wonderfully hosted us basically all day today. So thank you very much, Ali, for your really caring holding of us. And our next event is going to be it's going to be in Reading, but it could also be in your living room. So it will be online as well. And that event will be looking specifically at working with incarcerated women in the context of COVID. And really delightfully, we'll be joined by Clean Break again, and two artists who've been involved in their 2 Meters Apart project, and they'll be sharing a short piece of work from that. We'll also be joined by Rachel Conlon from York St John, who'll be sharing some telephone work that her and her students have been working on with women at Newhall Prison. And then we'll also be joined by Appeal, Women in Prison, and the Prison Reform Network to share a kind of overview of the field, and particularly kind of from a women's perspective, thinking about the work that's happening inside of prisons and the context of prison work in COVID-19. So that's on the 23rd of November, and I'll share details about that in the chat. So yeah, I think that's me. I'll pass back to you, Ali.
Yeah, well, I'm just going to start doing the washing up as though we've all had dinner together and now everyone's about to leave and I'm doing the washing up. So if anyone feels like they wish to stick around, I'll stay in the room. I know sometimes it's difficult to leave calls and feel like you've had all these light bulbs go off and there's no one to chat to. I'm here and I will be for the next, let's say 10 minutes, not much longer than that. Thank you so much to our amazing speakers this evening. It felt like a real great conversation, and thanks very much for everyone's participation.